I flew with the men and women at Texas DPS in these helicopters behind me today in one flight, Rob, 78 apprehensions. We are witnessing the largest U.S. intelligence failure since 9/11. From the cartels represent the most significant threats to national security and public safety to the American people, period.
Agent, they're coming up on your right. Or actually, they're coming up on your left,
Got him.
Good nab, good nab.
Job.
Yeah, we got a call to go assist Heber County. It's 8 or 10 women and kids are being held hostage by someone out here in the front.
Listen, I don't care if you're left, right, up, or down. None of us are okay with what's taking place down here. The challenge at the end of the day is getting this out and also getting news organizations to be truthful and honest to show it to the American people.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Prepared. Back in the studio after being in the field for a while. Now, I personally was not in the field. This go around, I sent both of my capable media guys, John Park and Jose, down to the border with Department of Public Safety for DPS for the state of Texas. Now, the big difference between DPS and most Department of Public Safety state patrolmen is their role in protecting their border. Now, you guys might have saw the video we posted on our social of all this mob, all these people coming from the Mexico side, headed to Eagle Pass, crossing into Del Rio, Texas. That is where the guys were sent to document the ground truth. Now, one of the things that we wanted to do in Prepared, in talking to you guys, Prepared is my book, a manual for surviving worst case scenarios, but education and getting all of the important information that's going to make you basically make the right decisions and set yourself up for success is very important. And you're not getting that from national media sources. You're just getting talking points from talking heads that are saying the same thing. There's a big disconnect between the ground truth and what's being reported via the national media, which is why we needed to get outside of the studio to tell this ground truth. One of the alarming things that both Jose and John reported on immediately hitting the ground was the amount of people they were dealing with. 78 apprehensions in one flight. That's them vectoring in, supporting Border Patrol, because the Border Patrol and DPS are working hand in hand, but there are limitations because the Border Patrol can't deal with it all, which is the great thing about the state of Texas is they're willing to step up and actually provide the support that's going to help everybody out on the ground. Some of the things that John reported back to me was the overwhelming amount of resources that were allocated is not enough to deal with the troves of people, dozens and dozens of people they interacted with and saw. At some points, actually landing the helicopter, using the helicopter personnel to interdict guys that were being chased by Border Patrol. When they first landed, in the 48 hours they spent on the ground, there was a homicide. It was probably unrelated to what was going on with the border, but we haven't made that determination. We actually captured that from the helicopter's perspective because one helicopter was dedicated to us, one helicopter was dedicated to Newsmax because Texas and DPS specifically understand the importance of telling the ground truth with all the things they're dealing with. So the 78 apprehensions, they had a homicide, they had a kidnapping, they had all of these things that were going on. You're going to be able to see all that in the background with the B-roll they captured. And also a Q&A session that took place with Jason Jones. Jason Jones is a retired captain from DPS who dealt in intelligence and counterterrorism, who has made it his life's mission to tell the truth of what's going on with the border wars. And certainly we are in a border crisis. Guys, this is not, by all numbers, all statistics, all facts, this is the worst it's ever been. According to Jason Jones, the worst it's ever been in his entire history working these border issues for the last 3 decades. We had a sit-down interview with Jason Jones where we talked about some of these issues, which I'm going to go ahead and roll now.
Sure, a little bit about my background. I'm a retired captain from the Texas Department of Public Safety's Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division. Been working the border since 1999 when I was first stationed on it in El Paso, Texas. Stationed on that border as an undercover narcotics agent in Brownsville, Texas, and I was a lieutenant in Laredo, Texas, as the war, as they call it, between the Los Zetas and Cartel de Golfo began. in late 2009, early 2010. And so I've been working this border in the Mexican cartels for many, many years. What's causing the spike right now is the policies of the United States government. And if you're down here on the border and you're talking to these folks, most of them are just economic migrants. Depending upon the country that they come from, where exemptions have been given by the administration, that tells you who's coming. Great example of that is July. You had Secretary Mayorkas provide exemptions for Hondurans, and what did we see within a matter of weeks? Tens of thousands of Hondurans pouring into the country. The data from U.S. Customs and Border Protection validates that. But that's not where the real challenge hits there. Where the real challenge hits is the untold story to the American people is how these cartels, how the alien smuggling organizations, how the Halcon network that controls and has operational control of your southwest border operates. But then also how all of them work with synergy with what we call long-haul smugglers today. Because when you think of your border, it's not a U.S.-Mexico problem, it's a global problem. And what they are doing to people, how they treat these people, and the impacts to the American people is the largest U.S. intelligence failure since 9/11. I say it all the time, I'll say it here, and I say it publicly. We are witnessing the largest U.S. intelligence failure since 9/11, and the threats from the cartels represent the most significant threats to national security and public safety to the American people, period. The data validates that. So what is not covered by the national media and why? Law enforcement has become just numb to fake media at this point. I'm just going to be very frank with you. They will not allow fake media into their organizations. Every once in a while you can get what we call a ride-along that will last maybe an hour, maybe a few hours. What we do is totally different. We conduct what we call embeds, and we go where law enforcement goes. We're able to do things that a lot of networks are not allowed to do. And if you understand the tradecraft and the discipline of these organizations, that is at the level that they are at, which allowed them to take over the country of Mexico, it's exactly why you have to be with law enforcement to understand what we're up against. A great example of that is the kidnapping and hostage rescue that took place this morning, period. You would have never seen that in the middle of nowhere if you had not been with helicopters and the men and women of the Texas Department of Public Safety's Aircraft Division. You would not have seen that if you hadn't been with BORTAC, the most elite units within Border Patrol, not just Border Patrol agents, elite units that responded to that, because all the other agents were on the line doing nothing but processing, because your border's wide open. And so that's why there are so many layers to the question as to why people in the North don't understand what we're dealing with in the South and historically have not. But with that being said, we have made huge strides in that. I'm a firm believer in the tactic that we use, which is illuminate it to eliminate it. If I show it to you, I don't have to get involved in what occurred. I can let that story play itself out in the video that we shoot. And Americans, listen, I don't care if you're left, right, up, or down. None of us are okay with what's taking place down here if you're really able to see it. But the challenge at the end of the day is getting this out and also getting news organizations to be truthful and honest to show it to the American people. First off, I love to listen to these so-called cartel experts that come on national television and regurgitate the same thing over and over again. It just drives me crazy. I think it's a great question. First, let's look to Mexico. If you go back to the early 2000s, we saw the recruitment of juveniles as within the Halcon network. Actually, so young we call them ventanas, which means windows, because these young kids of 7, 8, and 9, literally in plazas, will sit around and watch. When they see something they don't recognize, they notify the leadership, and that's part of the Halcon network, and that's how they make their way up from Hawks into Sicarios, which are the enforcement wing, and then they rise up within the organizations. When you talk about network capability and how these cartels operate, what is a cartel first off? Cartel means agreement. It's been bastardized over the last few decades, but they're so networked that really, each one is made up of a different type of network. And part of the solution in beating them is what we call network theory, to go after them. Whether you call them a hub, a spoke, a wheel, or a mesh network, every cartel is differently. The Sinaloans, who are one of the oldest cartels in Mexico, was never run by Chapo Guzman. That was all wrong. No, that was never correct. Chapo Guzman ran his cell. Today, his sons, known as the Los Chapitos, run their cell. And they are connected closely with the Salazars. And then you have El Mayo, who truly is the capo of the organization today. He's been around the longest. He's never been arrested. He's a rancher. He doesn't get involved in the day-to-day operations, but his network runs his side of the shop. And then you have Rafael Caro Quintero, who runs his side. So where I'm going with this is that how you go after these organizations and understanding their capabilities is very, very important. And if you wonder what's coming here, all you have to do is look at what they do in Mexico in regard to the level of corruption and the level of recruitment of young juveniles, as you asked about your question. Now take that here into our country, where you see them having parties along the southern border region, whether it's Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. One of the big tactics we see is they'll have these big parties and they'll invite these juveniles in junior high and high school over to these parties. The cartel will bring their tactical vests that say, I'll give you a great example. In Roma, Texas, for example, they'll bring their tactical vests, say Cartel del Este, with their patches. They'll bring their handheld encrypted radios, and they'll let the youngsters see them, make them think of power. Because you have to understand, in these poor communities, these kids who feel that they have nothing, just like gangs to some degree, see and look at these cartels, well, hey, I could be one of them. I may have nothing today, but I could be one of them. And I'll share a great story with you. We did a debrief one time of a Gulf cartel member. And as we were doing this briefing, my agent looked at him and said, you're a pretty sharp kid. What are you doing knowing you'll be dead in the next, 6 to 7 years? Why would you become this? He said, you don't understand, this is all I've ever wanted to be. He told a story about when he was a young man. He was outside, he was barefoot, and he's kicking a ball. And several Suburbans pull up, and this guy gets out, and he's got all these women. He's got a woman under one hand and a woman under another. He's got these guns, these chrome-plated pistols. And he walked up to the kid, he pulled out a wad of money, pulled out a US $100 bill, and he gave it to him. He said, hey, kid, go take care of your parents. And right then, that's exactly what he wanted to be. That is exactly what is taking place now on our side. And that extends to US-based street gangs with whom they contract with very closely, like MA, Tango Blast, and many, many others across our country. And if you talk to these cartels, they will tell you they contract with the cartels. That's exactly how it worked in Mexico first, before it came into the United States. And so that's the real in-depth process of how it works. And then when you look at the corruption models, they're not too far from that in how they corrupt our politicians, just as they do in Mexico. So that's the real in-depth version of how this works. But I can tell you, here's the problem. When you deal with a country like Mexico, we have so many young people who are poor, and where our country right now is dealing with a lot of financial issues, this is where you see so many of these young people available to come into these networks and to work for them. What is the right solution to solve the border problem? You have to remember, immediately to 90+% in this country, the very first thought is immigration. Immigration is one layer to a multi-tiered complex issue. But it is also the easiest of them all to really defeat, because we know that now through the last administration, who dropped illegal immigration by 80%. Over the horizon approach, what we call it, where if you're going to cross through multiple countries, you have to claim asylum in those other countries and stay there. The migration protection protocols, where you have to stay in and remain in Mexico. What those basically are layers of defense prior to the border, okay? Border security does not start at your border, that's where it ends. Let's be very clear on that. The over-the-horizon approach is extremely, extremely important. So when you talk about immigration, to me, of all of it, that's the simplest, believe it or not. What has happened in Mexico and what the United States intelligence agencies have not told the American people is the level of what has taken place with these cartels. It is, without question, the most significant national security and public safety threat to the American people, period. Why do I say that? Because of the overdose deaths in this country, really poisonings. 111,355 people from April of 22 to April of 23, according to CDC. I'm big on data. I don't go by anything or the way I feel or the way I think. If you overlay that with the violence in Mexico, you know, the Mexican people have been hit much harder than the American people by what's taken place with these cartels. And they murder journalists down there so that the story doesn't get out. Corruption is at the highest levels in Mexico. That country is truly a failed state. No one wants to tell you that. Everyone that works the border in Mexico knows it. So why have I been working for the last 7 years doing everything I can to get them designated as foreign terrorist organizations? Because of one thing. If you want to impact human smuggling, human trafficking, weapons trafficking, money laundering, kidnappings, extortion, and the long list of transnational crime impacting our country, you stop going after all of those elements. And you go after those who are responsible. And who are that? Who is that? It's the Mexican cartels. This isn't rocket science. It's not difficult to figure out. And so the terrorism designation gives us three major things. First, it doesn't mean we go to war. That's the wrong approach. You don't fight today's and tomorrow's problems with yesterday's mindset, nor tactics, because everything has changed. Three things you get. First, we have these people throughout all of our country. Please understand, you have tens of thousands of cartel members operating throughout our nation, whether in multiple facets of the criminal enterprise, not just the trafficking of drugs. What the terrorism designation is going to allow us to do is put speed in the system, revoke their visas, because remember, they've got money. Many of them are allowed to be here. We can revoke those visas and get them out of the country very rapidly. Now I don't have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a 2-year investigation. Two, you hear this term all the time, we need to go after their money. No shit. We've only been doing that for 20 plus years, but under Fourth Amendment domestically, that system by design moves very slow. We as Americans, we want it that way. Why do we want it that way? Because when the government targets us, we want to make sure that they cross every T and dot every I under the Fourth Amendment protections that have been allotted to us by our Constitution. But when you're fighting transnational crime, what you've not been told is it moves very rapidly, and it's a global problem. The terrorism designation is going to allow us to go after their money and their assets real time and seize it and shut them down. The third and final thing that's very important is now we can put them on terrorism watch lists and we can limit their mobility globally. They can't fly anymore. They can't get on ships. And when they do, we can take them down. The other part of this is it mandates the United States agencies by function and by priority to go after these cartels. So now what we're allowed to do is use the full tools of national power. So I don't want to go to war with these people. What I want to do is conduct clandestine operations with a level of brutality that Odin himself would be proud of. And that's exactly what we're going to do. But that doesn't mean always dropping munitions. Yes, we're going to have to do that because over the Sierras, the executive leadership and the capos are extremely powerful. You can't fly over the Sierras without them using surface-to-air missiles to bring you down, as we saw like in Operation Jalisco. So we know how, those of us who have targeted the cartels, built programs to go after them, know exactly what we need to do. The problem is that our government leaders will not allow us to do what needs to be done. And the last thing of this I want to say that's very important is I want to talk directly to the mothers and fathers who have lost their children. I have talked to you all over this country, and you have felt absolutely abandoned by our government. And I will tell you this, the solution is a unified command model. The win to this is not a U.S.-Mexico issue. It is not U.S. going unilaterally against Mexico. Mexico has people fighting for their families and their lives for their nation. We unite with them, and we unite with agencies and countries all over the world in what we call a unified command. And I don't care where you are in the world, the last thing you're going to want to be is a cartel member when the world's best of the best are coming for you. Because that's exactly what's going to take place at some point. But it won't happen, unfortunately, under this administration and under the failed leadership of the Homeland Security enterprise that we have in place today.
All right, guys. So there's significant issues going on that aren't just specifically related to what's happening on the border. What I mean by that is, yeah, sure, the border crisis, everybody kind of knows what's going on. We're putting out that information. Elon Musk was at Eagle Pass telling people via Twitter, hey, this is what's happening. This is the ground truth, because none of the national media want to report on this stuff. But that's not the end of it. In fact, I think that's just the beginning. Like we talked about with Sheriff Mark Lamb, this is not the last line of defense. These are the first lines of defense. Once they get outside of these areas, we no longer have control. And what are they getting across while we're dealing? One Border Patrol officer is dealing with a few migrants. What is he missing when he's allocating all his attention in one direction? Well, he's missing the fentanyl. He's missing the human trafficking. He's missing the weapon smuggling that are going both ways. So why is this issue such a hot topic issue, especially even for Prepared or for Newsmax or for these organizations that are telling the ground truth? Because we see what it's doing to the rest of the country in its various forms. Child and sex trafficking, drugs, the fentanyl crisis. I mean, all the fentanyl that is being passed through the cartel, smuggled into the country, and killing a lot of Americans. 84 Americans overdosed in August in San Francisco alone. 84. Out of those 84, 66 of them died specifically from fentanyl overdose. Now, if you're a superpower and you want to affect playing the long game, your national security interest, well, why would you not just smuggle in a drug into other drugs and kill the population slowly? Why would you not just do that? Well, there's speculation because most of the fentanyl that's sourced from the cartels is coming from China, that it's both collusion and a deliberate act. So we think it's important to get outside of the studio and report on these things, which is why I've already started reaching out to contacts in San Francisco, because I'm going to report on San Francisco and the fentanyl crisis and all the issues that these border crisis issues are affecting into the nation, including smuggling of people, smuggling of drugs, and killing Americans across the country. So we're going to report on that. If you have any contacts, by the way, feel free to reach out to us at info@fieldcraftsurvival.com, because we want to hear about your contacts, because we want to talk to people that are dealing with the fentanyl crisis. And also, we're going to be on the ground in San Francisco showing it specifically what's going on in the streets of San Fran when nobody else is reporting. Gavin Newsom's like, thumbs up, our state's doing great. And there are literally 84 people in 1 month dying on the streets of San Francisco alone. Guys, this is our new mission. We talk about this on Prepared. We put out all the information. We have segments that lead off into Mike Force podcast. This is the kind of things that we're doing collaboratively because we want to bring profound value to you. If you think that value is profound and you like what you hear, you like the education, make sure you comment, leave us your feedback, subscribe, and hit the notification tab because it's super important to us. I also want to mention our sponsor, Montana Knife Company. I've been working with Josh Smith for years now. Believe in his brand because he's American made and hasn't deviated from that. He's been a bladesmith for 30 plus years, one of the foremost experts in knives. I've interviewed him on podcasts when it comes to Fieldcraft Survival and knives since the origin story of my company, because he's the man. He's the man in Montana doing it the right way. I also want to offer you a coupon code MF10. MF10, Mike Force 10, MF10 will save you 10% because now for the first time in the history of his company, he's got his supply up because of the high demand where he's keeping knives in stock, not this Fieldcraft Survival knife. Unfortunately, that's not going to be in stock for you. That's going to sell out really quick. He does these 1,000 at a time, and they sell out pretty fast. But he has other knives, including his Speed Goat, that are in stock, and you can go on MontanaKnifeCompany.com using the coupon code MF10 to get your Speed Goat Blackfoot 2.0, whatever you want. It's available, and you can save today. Big shout out to Montana Knife Company for supporting this channel. We appreciate you guys, and we appreciate you supporting sponsors that support this country, because that's very important. Till next time, peace out, guys.